Now, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has welcomed the UK government's commitment to launch a Four Nations independent inquiry into the handling of the coronavirus crisis. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has confirmed it'll get underway next spring. But the announcement hasn't satisfied many of those who've lost friends and family during the pandemic. Peter Watson is a litigator with PBW Law, a firm that's representing a number of families whose relatives died in care homes here. Morning to you, Peter. First and foremost, what are your concerns then about this wider inquiry?
Well, I think there's a great lack of understanding by the families why we are having a four-nation inquiry for Scotland, because the problems that occurred in Scotland were devolved matters dealt with by the Cabinet Secretary for Health, dealt with by the then clinical director in Scotland. There was nothing to do with Westminster in any of this.
But I suppose there are those that would say actually an awful lot of the early decisions that were made and an awful lot of the pre-pandemic planning perhaps that wasn't done or should have been done was being led at a UK basis level.
Well, that wasn't the case. I mean, we had training exercises to deal with things like the pandemic. We had 3 in Scotland. The outcomes of those were poor. There were learning curves that emerged, which included things like PPE, adequate supplies and all the rest of it. These weren't followed. And much of what will be looked at by whatever inquiry takes place, we have the information already. We have Audit Scotland's report with 3 reports from the Care Inspectorate, all of which point out and condemn failures in Scotland, failures in Scottish decision-making. Shocking failures. I mean, we have an example of the failure of the basic cleaning materials in one particular care home, cleaning staff given air freshener rather than disinfectant.
We know that the Prime Minister has said that this inquiry will get underway next spring because he wants to consult the Four Nations. Do you think that the wider inquiry won't be able to get into the nitty-gritty like that?
Well,
why shouldn't it be able to look at each of the nations as well?
Well, it can look at each of the nations, but if you look at the logistics, where is the inquiry to sit? Is it to sit in London, or is it going to go on tour to Scotland? Who will chair that inquiry? Is it going to be judge-led, in which case, is it to be a judge from England, or are there going to be more than one judge? If it to be an expert instead of a judge, administering oath and calling experts, what experience and qualification will that person have to look at what took place in Scotland? Health is devolved, and that's fine. But with that power comes the responsibility. And the answers, first of all, the questions in Scotland will be specific to Scotland, and the answers will be specific to Scotland as well, because we're hoping to move on from the disaster that we've had in this instance. For example, moving elderly people out of hospital back into care homes with no risk analysis, no idea whether they were infected or not, no training or preparation for the care homes that were receiving them. That was a Scottish problem, and our death rate as a result of that was much higher in proportion than any other part of the United Kingdom.
But if there were instances of that happening across Wales, England and Northern Ireland, would it not be better to look at it all in a whole, even if it just simply means that the administrations can't start blaming each other, if it's looked at in the round?
Looking at in the round, of course, there's much to be said for that. There's also much to be said that we hope that this current proposal isn't a smokescreen to hide responsibility for those who took the decisions that were taken in Scotland.
What do you make of the decision not to start the inquiry until next spring?
Well, I know, but I've been involved in many public inquiries, and I know that they take time to set up, to identify witnesses, to ingather statements, to recover documents. I think it will be a huge task, all the bigger if it's going to be a UK-wide inquiry, all the easier to complete if it was a Scottish-based inquiry.
And what difference does that length of time make on the people that you represent?
Well, they are looking for answers. I mean, we know what the questions are that need to be asked. I mean, we have compiled them. We wrote to the Crown Office asking for a fatal accident inquiry or a criminal investigation by the police into what has occurred. We have documented and listed every issue that requires to be looked at. So we know the questions. We just need to get an opportunity to ask them.
Peter, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Peter Watson there, who's a litigator with PBW Law, a firm which represents a number of those families whose relatives died in care homes in Scotland.